мы начинаем наше второе заседание и подводим, ну, такие предварительные итоги, наверное, по первому. Мы беспокоились, как пройдет вот та форма, которая была предложена, 4 доклада и дискуссия. Мне кажется, что сложилось все вполне нормально. Были выслушаны очень качественные фундаментальные доклады, и они охватывали те темы, которые мы и предполагали. Если посмотреть на те направления и программы, которые мы выставляли, вот доклады, сделанные на первом заседании, они стремились охватить как можно более широкий круг вопросов.
Dear friends, we indeed welcome to our next meeting. It is the second part of the second International Scientific-Methodological Seminar. Of course, we're very amusing to welcome you to our second part, and we were worrying about our first part, how it would be. So there were 4 presentations and a little bit discussion, but everything was very great. The themes was remarkable and amusing. Thank you very much for all.
Дискуссии затрагивали вопросы гуманитарного характера преимущественно. И мы хотели поставить как раз в центр нашу дискуссию, наших вопросов именно вот этот антрополого-гуманитарный такой аспект.
The discussion for the last part was about the humanitarian approach, and we would like to do this because our new opportunity is to take part in the anthropology of history, so social anthropology, jurisprudence anthropology, and we want to say you welcome.
В сегодняшней программе, я обратил внимание, затрагивается более широкий круг вопросов. Подключены социологические аспекты, собственно, теоретические, отраслевые правовые аспекты.
So today I see that the presentations are much more wide. For example, sociological approach and anthropological approach, historical approach, and cultural approach.
И в любом случае, так или иначе, в этих тематиках просвечивает наша основная идея, наша основная тема. Это иррациональные аспекты права.
And otherwise, in all these presentations, we can see our main theme, the irrational of law.
Учитывая большее число докладчиков, мы будем ориентироваться на более такой строгий регламент выступлений. И я думаю, что наши модераторы, которые уже имеют большой опыт, великолепно справляются с работой, они выдержат этот график.
And so that today we have much more presentation. I would like to say about the time, of course, because it's now not for discussions. And of course, I want to say great thanks for our moderations. They are very good moderations, and thank them, and all will be the great also as it were.
И я, как и многие другие, будут с интересом ждать опубликованных ваших докладов для того, чтобы их прочитать, не торопясь и внимательно.
And so I believe that you would make the very interesting articles for your presentations, and I am waiting for them, and I would like to read it with a great interest.
Большое вам спасибо, удачи вам в сегодняшней работе, и передаю слово нашим модераторам. Валентина Геннадьевна, пожалуйста. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. I would like to congratulate you with our second part, and it is the excellent part, and with great pleasure I'm going to take a word for our moderations. for example, for Dr. Mansova. Okay, you're welcome. Thank you very much. Have a good time and good luck and amazing discussion. You're
Thank you very
welcome.
much. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. And excuse me, because a little bit I have some problems with my microphone. So I will change the computer and all will be very okay. But the first part, the first presentation, we make in like this when I am speaking by microphone and telephone, hear you by telephone booth. So thank you very much for your responsible and take part with us. We will have a new projects right now in December and in January and February. We would like to make the new research. And for example, in our plans is right now to make a new research group. Legal History and Future Research Group. And I would like to say for all of us, you're welcome to this research group. We will have a very good projects. Also this International Scientific Methodological Seminar and something else. And so it is only the beginning. So excuse me for our mistakes or a little bit problems. And of course, we would like to see you in our publications. We can make it very much more that you can think about it. And so certification program and publication, it's our purpose and we will do it. So the next seminar, as you wish and as we hope that it will be starts in the first dates of February. So welcome. The theme will be the same, methodologies of law, irrational in law. And so today our discussion is also in this theme. And I would like to say that my big friend and my also my our moderator, Dr. Segalebro Gianluigi is right now, and could dear Gianluigi say for us also a few words?
Well, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me because there is a deluge here in Gino today, and therefore there are always problems with the connection, but I think it is functioning very well up to now, at least. I would like to thank you, Valentina, all the members of the organization for this wonderful webinar. Of course, I would like to thank you, all the members of the organization and of the audience also for the webinar of 2 days ago, because it was wonderful too. And I think we have today a very various and very interesting program. I am looking forward to hearing all the contributions. I think that we will have much time also for discussion and main subjects to discuss from, because the arguments are all very interesting and very rich, as I have seen. And so I think we can now begin our expositions and our discussion. And so good work to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gianluigi. And so right now we would like to make our discussion. The first hour presentation, the first hour speaker, and also I hope that I could say like this, our best friend, Professor Giri Anantakumar, and his presentation towards a new poetic of law, justice and development, multi-topical hermeneutics, and the calling of planetary realizations. So some problems also. Could you hear me, dear Ananta? Okay, excuse us. Let a little bit waiting.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Okay.
So you can make your presentation.
Okay, you can hear. Okay, dear Valentina, dear Ganluigi, and dear all friends, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay, so dear friends, good afternoon from India, and I am in a place where the internet connection is slightly difficult, but I hope and pray that you can hear me, and we'll continue our conversation. Put my PPT on the screen.
Okay.
Okay, so I begin my presentation with this theme. So towards a new poetics of law and justice and integral human development and social transformations. And it also has a subtitle, multi-topial hermeneutics and contemporary visions and pathways of planetary realizations. Once again, I'm grateful to Valentina and Gianluigi and all dear friends for our journey together today. Now, when we talk of law, I want to begin with the theme of poetics of law. And to open up this conversation, I request to please bring the next slide. The next one, please. Can you kindly go down, please? This is the, and it goes with this paper, very interesting paper by James Parker called a lexicon of law and listening. Parker is a scholar of law from Australia, and what he invites us to understand that how each of the word in English language, for example, from A to Z, what would be the legal alphabet? For example, B for bell. When we go to the courtroom, we hear the bell ringing, for example. And for example, C for code. So to understand the relationship between law and language, I request you to come to the next slide, please. The next one, kindly go down. Valentina, yeah. So here it is written, there is something satisfied about the alphabet, about alphabetization. And so dictionary and lexicons, they feel complete. There is a sense of coverage and order. This is a fantasy, of course, but it is one into which we are inducted from our very early encounters with the word of writing, and so also in a manner of speaking of law. How strange that so often the medium of this induction is the voice that we learn to read by listening. Law's textuality has been systematically overrated. Even text sing, and if there is a more familiar refrain in the English language than the alphabet song, I would be surprised, as a way into thinking about or thinking about the relationship between law and listening. Therefore, the lexicon is quite suggestive. It offers a roadmap that is at once arbitrary and entirely governed by the strange logic of the phonotext. So what Parker, and the next slide, please, as the next slide is coming, I want to explain this idea that how the alphabetization of the word, it brings a sense of closure, a sense of certainty, a sense of control. And while doing law, we would have to understand the limits of this alphabetization. And the next slide, please. Kindly go down. The next one, Valentina, please. Can I request Valentina to go down, please? So in the next slide, and I am
some technical problems.
Just go down.
So please, a little bit waiting. We will make presentation better.
Okay. Okay. And then we would do our best, you know. I also have some technical problem here, so I'm standing, so we'll do our best. So in the next thing then, what Parker is saying, for example, look at the word I. Now, the I also corresponds to the word ineffable, ineffable. That means which we cannot really calculate. So all these words like law, when it deals with the ineffable, so how does it become law? And here he is referring to the work of Derrida. Now it is coming, dear Valentina, thank you. For example, here he is saying I is for the ineffable, the profound difficulty, even the impossibility of putting certain experiences to words. Sound and music often get singled out in this respect. When people struggle to describe that special quality in a favorite singer's voice, or the power and impact of certain recordings and live performances. As Victor Hugo is supposed to have put it, music expresses that which cannot be said and on which it is impossible to be silent. For Vladimir Jaklevitsky, in his little-known treatise on this topic, the ineffable is that which provokes bewilderment. Like Hugo before him, for Jaklevitsky, music is ineffable not because it is somehow meaningless, it resists description and or cannot be explained, that is because there are infinite and indeterminable things to be said of it, not zero. So it is only in the imagining and dismissing and doing it again and again a piece of music's meaning, power and import that one asymptotically approaches an intimation of something that will elude any clear searchlight. So again, the problem here is that when law is dealing with the ineffable or the indescribable, how do we take part in that journey? And in the next slide, if you can kindly bring as it is coming, there is reference to Derrida, where Derrida is saying that law is always not leading to justice, because justice is always an impossible possibility. And as we go on, and then I would like to, if you can kindly bring the next slide as you are going on, please. So I would like to refer these alphabets, like A is for something and B is for beginning. I have prepared a book of poems called Alphabets of Creation, and it goes like this. A is for Aum, A is for Allah, and in the Islamic tradition, Aleph in the Christian tradition. But B is P, but A is for annihilation, B is also for bestiality, our sense of beastly nature, C is for cruelty. So how do we do with the alphabets of creation? Again, Aleph on the one hand and annihilation on the other. And this is also a challenge before law, society, and humanity. And in my offering about poetics of law, I to bring this challenge, the concrete and the suggestive, referring to him. And Bakshi wrote a very important essay almost 50 years ago on the landlight struggles in Australia. And he has an essay on law as dreaming, because among the Australian Aborigines, yes, can you hear me, Valentina, please? So if you can hear me, I am continuing with the journey of conversation by saying that this way of thinking about law is a movement now. In India, we have a new law school called Jindal Law School. It is a Jindal Global Law University, and they have come out with their fascinating journal called Jindal Review of Law and Humanities. And if you go to the next slide, I'm coming there. And in this Jindal Law of Humanities, the editor, Manishankar Singh, who is a friend of mine, he is challenging us to realize that how we would have to talk of law in a different way. And here he is saying that the distinction between law and, yes, thank you, dear Victoria, sorry, dear Valentina. And he's saying that how do we do law by other means, to borrow from Peter Goodrich. And we also have to overcome the distinction between law and non-law, and may bring law in speaking terms with social sciences and humanities. So my offering of poetics of law is part of this conversation between law, literature, philosophy, and social science, and therefore make legal discourse, legal practice a part of an integral human development. And the whole idea of integral human development is that that human being is simultaneously legal and spiritual, and how law can help us in this journey. And we move on to the next slide, please, in which, in the editorial in this journal, it is written, yet the structure is not an apology for our failures, but a contingent site of subversion. And therefore, the structures that we have, whether it is legal structure or our very structure of thinking, even the way the legal doctrines are written, they are too prosaic, they are too textual. And how do we bring a sense of live poetry into it? But because there is a prosaic hard structure, that does not mean it is an apology for justification of all the unsustainable practices that we are doing. For example, the unsustainable way of thinking about law in a sense of prosaic fundamentalism or textual terrorism. So then we go to the next slide, please. And with this submission, I am coming to poetics of development, that how we can think about poetry, law, justice, and human development. As I begin, I want to bring the very important book by Martha Nussbaum, who is also a philosopher of humanities and law, her book Poetic Justice, in which Nussbaum is saying that the great significance of rhetorics and poetry in bringing a sense of justice. Now, Nussbaum also has been collaborating with Amartya Sen. Our dear friend Gyan Luigi is a scholar of Amartya Sen who has been talking about capability, and he is talking about functioning and capability. And Martha Nussbaum has joined that program of capability thinking. And to this, Martha Nussbaum is highlighting the significance of art and poetry. To this, I am adding a discourse of poetics of development by saying that how development, human development, is not just getting the opportunity to work, but the ability also to write a poem, to sing a song. And that creativity dimension is very important. Similarly, in the legal profession also, if we can bring poetry to legal thinking, our way to think would be much more broadened. To help us in this journey, I offer you some philosophical thinking, begin with this contemporary, insightful philosopher Charles Taylor, who is writing, poetry can be seen as an event with performative force. Words which open up this contact make something manifest for the first time. But what is this event? Outside of the most subjectivist interpretation, it has an objective side, something language transcendent is manifest, set free. Therefore, Taylor is saying poems or poetry opens new paths, sets free new realities, but only for those for whom it resonates. Therefore, dear friends, in order that poetry can resonate with us, for example, legal discourse, then our legal scholars and lawyers also have to open themselves to the tune of the poetic. This is the preparation that is called for from the legal profession. I request to come to the next slide, which brings the thought of Martin Heidegger, who is also saying poetry is not merely an ornament accompanying existence, not merely a temporary enthusiasm or nothing, but an interest and amusement. Poetry is the foundation which supports history. And then poetry never takes language as a raw material ready to hand. Rather, it is poetry which makes language possible. And the next one, when it is coming, Heidegger is expanding this meaning of poetry and building upon this thought of poetics. And then Heidegger is saying that the foundation of human existence is conversation. And I go on to the next slide, introducing Heidegger, by coming that when Heidegger is talking about poetry, but the politics of this poetry, there can be a politics of valorization leading to annihilation. As you know, Martin Heidegger became a member of the Nazi party, and he was made chancellor of rector of University of Freiburg. Of course, Heidegger resigned from that position, but he never expressed regret for all the killing, including the Holocaust. So I want to bring these dimensions of the poetry in the sense that nationalistic poetry, whether it is German, Russian, or Indian, now this nationalistic poetry of valorization is not sufficiently attuned to the suffering of the people. Heidegger at the same time talks about pathos of secondness, the pathos of vulnerability, the very fact that you and me are fragile bodies who can be taken at any time and put it into either Gulag archipelago or concentration camp, about which some contemporary thinkers are also writing. So to talk about poetry then, we would have to be aware of the danger of poetry as an ontology of strength, assertion, and annihilation. To this, we would have to cultivate what Gani Bhattimo, a fellow philosopher from our dear friend Gianluigi's Italy, calls weak ontology. And another contemporary scholar, Harari, who in his book 21 Lessons for 21st Century, he's saying that if we look at human history, human stupidity has played a very destructive force. And today, look all around how human stupidity is creating havoc. And Harari is suggesting that the response to stupidity is cultivation of humility. My submission is that poetics of law and development is part of that journey of acknowledging our own stupidity and then cultivating humility and thus creating our creative capacity for possibility. We move on, the next one, please. And it is in that context I introduce this idea of poetics of development, which then challenges us to rethink development itself. For example, is development only development of legal institutions? We know how the legal system everywhere, whether it is USA, even President Trump, who didn't have even 45 days before his term was coming, he very quickly nominated a judge who has become a full member of the Supreme Court. And that was a contentious process. And it has tilted the balance of power between the conservative and the progressive judges. My point is that the legal system everywhere, USA and India also, with respect, I want to say that in India also we are witnessing some difficulty in terms of the impartial relationship between the executive and the judiciary. And my point is that the legal development is not just existence of court, but it is something else. That courage to confront power and poetics of development is to have that courage. And I go on to the next one, where I say that poetics of development is the ability to develop the poetic and creative side of self and society. It invites us to not to forget that sun rises every morning, birds sing, we get energy and will to live, not only from the sun, moon, food, money, and petrol, but from the way we look at each other, smile with and sing together. Poetry here constitutes a broad love of life and is the ability to express oneself creativity and enabling others for their creative self-realization and co-realization, as reminding us of the following lines of Hölderlin, the German poet whom Heidegger followed, and poetically dwells man on this earth. Poetics of development refers to development of subtler dimensions, and that is one aspect of poetics of development. In the next slide, I'm bringing another aspect of poetry of development by referring to this great Jewish German poet, Ansel Celan, who writes, I find something that binds and leads to encounter like a poem. I find a meridian. Therefore, the meridian or the middle point, the midpoint where we are, the law and society, law and nature, law and divinity, and that kind of the meridian, with this meridian or what Heidegger may call the midpoint of relationships, poetry can help us cultivate the performative in our lives as not only a site of reproduction of the existing pyramids, but as an emergent space and time of rotating the pyramids and creating new realities and possibilities of a different dream and a different relationship. And the next slide, please. Here I bring the whole question of poetics of law and justice by bringing suffering. As we can appreciate that law is also to some extent dealing with human suffering. But that while dealing with human suffering, law sometimes also becomes a part in production of social suffering. It is in that context towards a new poetics of the prophetic. And the next slide, as this is coming, I want to suggest that the whole work of justice is a prophetic work. And as you know, for example, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the prophets in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, they have fought for justice. Similarly, in the Islamic tradition, it is the prophets, and the one meaning of Islam is fight for justice. And similarly, in the Indian tradition, in Bhagavad Gita, also there is a struggle for justice. And that struggle for justice is a prophetic struggle. That means that we would have to prophetically fight for justice. And in that prophetic struggle, there is a poetry, because most of the prophets, they speak in a poetic language. As Isaac Bashevis Singer, who got Nobel Prize in Literature, writes, in the history of old Jewish literature, there was never any basic difference between the poet and the prophet. So, dear friends, in thinking about justice, then we need to think about the prophetic dimension of justice, and that prophetic dimension of justice also has a poetic dimension. But if the prophetic dimension of justice has a poetic dimension, then the challenge is a challenge of hermeneutics, which I'm coming after a few minutes. But at this point, the point is that all the prophets, their language of justice is not just literal, it is also symbolic. To understand the symbolic language of the prophetic struggle for justice, we need to create a symbolic language, a poetic language, and not just literal language. But the poetic language of prophets in the Abrahamic traditions, as well as in modernity, such as Karl Marx, got translated literally, imprisoning it in literal fundamentalism in religion, culture, politics, and society. Today, we need to liberate the prophetic work in histories and societies from this literal binding and blindness and bring the poetic here. And the next one, please. So in this journey, then, the prophetic and the poetic work together. And here I also, explain more about it. And we can go to the next slide, please. I would finish quickly by bringing a few more points. So therefore, this poetics of development, also here I'm requesting us to understand poetics of development challenges us to be both a friend of the world as well as a bhikkhu. Bhikkhu means, from the Buddhist tradition, who walks on the road and asks for something. In the Western tradition, there is a long meditation on the limits and possibilities of friendship, from Aristotle to Derrida, including those like Carl Schmitt, who like to propose an essential model of enmity as a foundation of polity and law. To this, we can invite the path of becoming of bhikkhu, means a beggar drawing from the path of Buddha. A bhikkhu is not just a seeker, he is also a beggar, though the word has definitely a taken for granted negative connotation in contemporary discourse as in English language. So we need to really ask for new kind of life. And going on to the next slide, please. I would like to then, here I link the poetics of development to the possibility to do thread works. How do we weave together? Like a poet weaves the words, similarly the legal practitioner has to weave many words. So, and in the midst of threads, because our contemporary world has many threads, both the outer thread and the inner thread, how do you weave together thread work? So in poetics of development, the poetic as part of establishing connection and commons is linked to a thread work, threading words and words together. It cultivates a mode of being with language through persuasion, the important work of rhetorics, creative rhetorics, like Abraham Lincoln and many Russian poets, And the next slide, please. So with this, I also links poetics of development to creation of soulful and social quality. And next one, please. And here I also bring the whole idea of soulful poetry and a new art of reconciliation. For example, during the Civil War rights movement in the USA, 50 years ago, the great singer Joan Baez, who drew inspiration from poet and singer Rabindranath Tagore, he had a beautiful song, "Where have all the flowers gone?" Similarly, we can ask, where have all the poems gone? And the next one, please. And in the next slide, I'm giving examples. Before I say this poem, I'm giving examples how, for example, in Rwanda, when a genocide happened in 1994, my friend from Switzerland, Andrea, she has done work on poetry and healing and how poetry become a space of healing. And now, in terms of dreaming, I present you this poem, Dreams, Dreaming, Dancing with Dreams, Tending Dreams with Kisses, Singing Songs to Dreams as Singing Songs of Dreams, a new beginning and a new possibility. And the next poem, please, as it is coming. And here I'm presenting that if, Valentina had sent me a picture of a woman with eyes and holding, something in her hand. Again, day before yesterday, I was telling you about the picture of the law woman with blindfolded. So what is an eye? Is I an eye alone, or is I also an ear? Is I and we an ear of the soul and the other eye of the heart? The next one, please. I'm concluding in 5 minutes. I have already mentioned about Martha Nussbaum. So let me move on. The next one, please. And here, very quickly, I would introduce the idea of multi-topial hermeneutics. Hermeneutics, as you know, it is a journey of interpretation and understanding. Mainly, it began with text, but then hermeneutics become quite dynamic. It is not just an interpretation of text. As Michel Foucault, in his book Towards the New Hermeneutic of Self, Foucault is saying, the challenge before us today is how do we become an individual, a self, beyond the model of individualization suggested by the state. Similarly, Gandhi, as you know, that Gandhi began his great struggle where he challenges us to understand law, that when we talk of law, there are also many laws which are unjust by themselves. And when laws are themselves are unjust, Gandhi, building on Henry David Thoreau, he talked about civil disobedience. And as you know, how civil disobedience is very important. And in America and in India, and Gandhi began the Satyagraha, the struggle for truth, which was also a civil disobedience movement. Here, Sri Aurobindo, I am telling you from Pondicherry, I am speaking with you from Pondicherry, which is home of Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo was a great thinker, also a poet. In his epic Savitri, he is describing the journey of this courageous fighting woman, Savitri, who is in dialogue with death, saying, I trump it. And here I want to bring fit to our hermeneutics, because hermeneutics is not just an interpretation of law as a dead letter. Because when we are living life on our feet, when we are being pushed around, and at that moment, we would have to rise up and dance and trample the law of death with our living feet. And that is the poetics of law. That is the poetics of justice. That is a different kind of hermeneutics, which I'm talking a foot-walking hermeneutics. We do hermeneutics with our feet, and it is a foot meditative hermeneutics, and it is multi-topial because as human beings, we have 2 feet. We put our feet in one side and another feet in another side, and not only in 2 cultures, but multiple cultures. So this idea of multi-topial hermeneutics we have to bring into law, because law is still very textual. And how do we make it alive? And when it becomes Hermeneutics, we would have to really work and meditate with multiple traditions of humanity, indigenous law, for example. All laws, the customary law, legal traditions and philosophies in Russia, South America, America, India, Chinese. So this is the challenge of planetary realizations I'm suggesting. And planetary realizations meaning that we would have to realize ourselves that as a being with the planet, we all beings, we are born of 5 elements: air, water, the sky. And so therefore, the legal discourse is not just limited to the courtroom, and it is part of being of life in the planet. So these are some of my offerings to you all, dear friends, and thank you so much. Pasiba.
There are very many questions which I would like to pose. The first one is perhaps beginning with the last words, last sentences of your wonderful exposition, that is with Satyagraha and with Gandhi. I think that it could connect us, bind us to something which we had discussed upon already on Wednesday. It is, I think that central in Gandhi's thought and then in the followers of Gandhi is the conception that there is something beyond the positive law and the positive order of jurisprudence. That is, in case that we have laws which we cannot accept, we have to refuse them, in as much as we hold on the truth, Satyagraha. And this is, in my point, a position of Gandhi which is clearly for the conception of the refusal of, for instance, the positive jurisprudence and the positive conception of law, wherein there is nothing beyond and outside law. I think that Gandhi, with Satyagraha, gave a wonderful demonstration of the sufficiency of the theories of positive law, and he testified that there is something, some content, many ethical content, which precede laws, which precede law orders, and which should, in a right society, be the, so to speak, the root, the very root of the jurisprudence. And in truth, I agree completely with you when you say Gita, Bhagavad Gita is a text also for the search and finding of justice. This would be my first remark and question. Is I think that Gandhi offered a wonderful example of the insufficiency of positive theory of right, of right, law theory. And second, I would say that, well, I found very interesting what you introduced at the beginning about the lexicon of law and listening. And because, and on James Parker, for instance, here I would like to have some more information, and as well, I think that it is right what you said about Peter Goodrich and his law theory, and I would be grateful if you could say us something more about the thought, the law thought of Peter Goodrich, which I always found very interesting. Among other things, I did not know that there is a Jindal Law School. That is, I was there at the Jindal University 2 years ago, but I unfortunately could not speak very much with all the presence because it was a wonderful Congress, but very great. And well, I am always very happy to hear something about the Jindal University. Now, so I limit here my intervention here, and in order to give the word to other people if they want to intervene. But anyway, I would like to say that I found very, very interesting everything you told, and mostly that about Satyagraha, because it has a relevance, a precise relevance, in my opinion. These two law interpretations. Is, for instance, now in the US system of law, system interpretation, that of Ronald Dworkin, about the existence of a body of ethics which precedes the laws, and on the other side, on the opposite side, the interpretation of the positive, neo-positivistic system of law. Thank you very much.
And today, this whole relationship between law and listening that Parker is hinting at, we need to take it further by talking about that how we need to develop the capacity to listen. One is, for example, that the legal system is already part of the system world of money and power to such an extent that the legal system has lost the ability to listen to unheard voices. People who do not have money, their voices cannot be listened to. People who do not have political power, their voices cannot be listened to. Therefore, listening becomes a courageous act today. And to listen, we would have to move from our comfort zones. Therefore, my idea of multitopial hermeneutics is that we have to do hermeneutics moving from our zones of security. For example, how do we bring justice to Australian Aborigines? I was referring to the work of Upendra Bakshi about it. Or today, the indigenous people everywhere, whether it is in Russia or in South America or India, they are at the receiving end of the national justice system. So to do that, we would have to listen to indigenous voices, their sense of law, their sense of common law. And that listening is very important. And here, in that act of listening, I'm remembering, Pope Francis of the Vatican, who is also in Italy. And Pope Francis is talking about that how we have to be apostles of ears. Therefore, the whole poetics of law today is developing the capacity to listen. And we become not apostles of fear. I have a poem about it in which I'm writing that let us not be apostles of fears, but let us be apostle of ears. So that kind of a journey, we would have to move from the field of fear and hatred to a field of listening, care, and new creativity and commands. And that is the meaning of planetary realizations.
I think it's very great ideas, and we should make much more propaganda about these views. Thank you very much for your attention. And of course, today it's Friday, some problems with Zoom and communication, but you're very patient for us, and thank you for your wonderful presentation, dear Ananta.
Spasiba, dear Valentina. Thank you, all dear friends. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So I would like to introduce our new guest. So for our new presentation, and our new guest is Dr. Goswami Anita. Dear Anita, could you?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. So it's our new guest. So I'm very enjoy that you is with us, and the next presentation will be Hindi Code Deal and Manusbrit methodological aspect. So it's for us, it's a very important item because we learn much about this in our subject. So in legal history and
state history. So we will like to see and to listen your report. Thank you very much. So you're welcome, please.
Thank you very much to give me this opportunity to be a part of this wonderful conference. So my topic is about Manu and Manu Smriti. It is a very important literature from ancient India, which gives a sight to us that how the things was going on at that time. And it was as much important for us all that in Indian Constitution after independence, we adopt the idea of Manu in this Hindu Code Bill. So Hindu Code Bill is related to the marriage terms and conditions we follow for all the Indian women and men. And we try to decide all the matters related to the marriage in court, which is based on this Manu Smriti's ideas. So in Hindu religion, for the Hindu bills and Hindu code and conduct, we follow Manu Smriti basically. Not totally, because there are some aspects which are not that much useful for us nowadays. First of all, I would like to greet my all dignitaries present over here in the conference. And I would start with the Manu and Manu Smriti's views about Hindu marriage. So before starting, I would like to share with all of you few ideas of ancient India which were prevailing at the time, and by which this all system of Hindu marriage was depending. So there were fourfold system in ancient India. Like for life, we have 4 ashramas. So they were Brahmacharya, Grahastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyas ashram. In Grahastha ashram, we have to follow the rules and regulations for a marriage, and we follow married life from the Grahastha ashram. Then there were 4 systems of society. Like we have divided the society in 4 different castes, which were depicted in the Rigveda Dasham Mandal Upanishad. There's Brahmanam Mukhamasid Bahu Rajanya Krata Yat Urudasya Tatvasya Padabhyam Shudro Ajayat. Means there was the topmost class in society, which was of Brahmins. The second one was the Kshatriyas, then Vaishya, and the last one was Shudra. So Shudra belonged to little bit lower caste, which served the upper 3 classes. Now we can identify in modern India these Shudras as Dalits or the lower castes. So Manu made the rules marriage for the upper classes. There were some different rules, and for the lower classes there were the different rules. And this is the main point where in modern India people sometimes criticize Manu for giving some views in Manu Smriti. Some feminist also opposes Manu, that sometimes he gives lot of freedom and lot of respect to women, like yatra naryastu pujyante ramante tatra devata. And sometimes he becomes very much rigid in giving freedom to women to step out of the house and to do things which are related to the freedom and all. So now I would like to discuss with you all the rules which Manu imposed on the marriage system. So marriage system and tradition were established in ancient India over an extended period of sustained imbibing and processing and gradual codification of social mores by scholars and thinkers. The codification may have taken hundreds of years, or it may have occurred relatively quickly. It may have passed or orally initially, like the Vedas, or may have been rendered in written form ab initio. Commentaries made by many sovereigns are available to this day. As is well known, the Puranas and Upanishads are a major source of Hindu record wisdom. There is also a series of books known as Smritis, which are rich source of Hindu tradition. If we talk about the time period of Smritis, it was from today's time around 1400 years to 2000 years back from nowadays. So two important lawgivers in these traditions were Manu and Yajnavalkya. They were as important to the Aryans of Aryavrata as Hammurabi was to the Sumerians of Mesopotamia. Manu was the more ancient of the two, and he propagated many ideas, some of which would have led to serious criminal charges being laid against him in the modern day India. These ideas related to the position of what were called the lower caste in those times. Today, there is serious opposition to Manu's ideas uh, from the traditionally oppressed classes, which are known as Dalits in India. Interestingly, many leaders of Dalits continues to refer to the former so-called upper caste as upper caste classes. Yajnavalkya was the more evolved of the two in himself and Manu. But he too was not entirely sinless as far as his attitude towards the so-called lower caste was concerned. More about him later. For now, we will concentrate on Manu and his Manu Smriti. It is also interesting to note that though Manu has disowned the discard by the powers that be in our democracy, his Smriti continues to provide a large portion of the basis and philosophical grounds for various provisions in marriage law and for Hindus. This may be considered distressing in view of the fact that Manu has been repeatedly, precisely because of this Smriti, social mores have also progressed, and the homogeneity that exists in those times has been atomized and colored in lakhs or crores of hues seen over lakhs or crores of pixeled and amorphous and formations. Manu Smriti is vast in its scope. It purports to explain all of the cosmos, the nature of human beings, and the path that men and women should follow. Amongst a host of other things, it goes from the beginning of creation to its end. It proclaims the law on behavior and conduct of all the four varnas. I have already told you about the four varnas. The process of creation, the various sacraments means samskars. So in Hindu tradition, we have 16 sanskar from the beginning of having a birth till the last breath. So they were 16 in number, in which various samskar were before the birth, 3 were before the birth, and 4 were at the time of the birth, and later marriage and last ritual. So these all were 16 samskaras. So the various sacraments, sanskars of Hindu, from conception to birth, life, death, and beyond, it also lays down the rules to be followed by a student vis-a-vis his studies and his guru, the equivalent of a modern university, ordinance, or calendar, and more. It declares the norms and relationship between men and women, and men and men, and bachelors and married men, retired persons, renunciation, the law regarding rightful livelihood, the law on marriage, the ways of obtain salvation. Salvation means moksha, which was the topmost priority for all the Indians at the end of the birth, so that they can get rid from rebirth and this chain of having birth and death, again birth and death. So moksha can relieve them from this chain. It describes the province of intermediate or mixed caste, the way of administering justice, the laws of various lands, the law about gambling, the ways to remove obstacles and villains, and many other things. Manu talks about Shruti and Smriti. So these Shruti and Smriti are basically what Shruti means, to listen, and Smriti, to have it in your mind, to remember it. So Shruti and Smriti were the two types by which we have our studies and all, is the knowledge which has been received by mankind via revelation, while Smriti is aggression, a great of the tradition that keep Hindu culture alive, united, and coherent in his view. Means Manu Smriti, Smriti, which thing which we have in our mind, which we should always kept in mind for remembering, which gives us guidelines to live a life, not only to live a life, but how to live a life and how to pass it and what laws we should follow while living our lives. Examples of the first are Gita and the Vedas. Like these are Shrutis, Gita and Vedas. Vedas are not, we suppose that they are not written. They are all in form of oral formations, oral teachings. Interestingly, the mention that two Shrutis can state conflicting views and can both be valid simultaneously. Manu was one of the earliest to mention clearly that the stage of life after Brahmacharya ashram is the Grahastha ashram. The former is the first part of life during which a young man goes from being born to being a student and learning about the scriptures. This ashram is entered into by all men of the twice born caste, means Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas. So this was not allowed for the Shudras, which were the fourth caste. All of these castes are eligible and required to study the Vedas, but they're not eligible to teach the same. Only a Brahmin can be permitted to teach this revealed knowledge to his own and to other castes. The minimum requirement for a Hindu man to get married is to find a chaste woman from his own caste or an equal caste, virginity being as important as caste. Manu further says that only a woman with auspicious marks on her body may be married. This leads to an inevitable suspicion that Manu did not want Hindu men to marry disabled women. Manu goes on to mention several categories of women who cannot be married. These include epileptic women. Amazingly, instead of removing this oppressive condition from statute, the farmers of the Hindu Marriage Act made it possible to get marriages annulled if either the man or the woman in that marriage was an epileptic. This is too good. Don't eliminate the oppression of women. Just oppress men equally and call it even. This condition was removed from the relevant law near the end of the 20th century. A few other categories of women who cannot be married are sapindas. Sapindas means the person who born from the same family. So sapindas of the Hindu man on his mother's side or women who are related to him on his father's side of the family, those who suffer certain specific diseases, women named after constellations. So all men who get married to women named Swati or breaking Manu's law, or women who have fear-inducing name, no Kalis, Kalindikas, Chamundas, Kali, Bhairavis, or perhaps even Durgas. He disallows women who belong to families which do not follow Vedic rituals. Women who are named after rivers like no Gomtis, Narmada, Mandakini. Women who are named after trees, no Ambikas or Kadambaris. Women who are named after birds, means no Sarikas, and women who have no brothers. Manu also forbids marrying a woman whose father is no more, in order to avoid the possibility of committing incest. Manu permits second marriage. He is in fact much more liberal in terms of caste requirements in the case of second marriages than in first marriage. He says that any man can marry any woman of his own caste or a lower caste should be decided to take a second wife. This in part shows the concept of anuloma and pratiloma. These were the two types of marriage, anulom and pratilom. So anulom means permissible and pratilom is non-permissible. So the first being a marriage between a man of a higher caste and a woman of a lower caste. Such a marriage is permitted. The other kind, pratiloma, is not. However, this comes with the proviso that any Brahmin who takes a Shudra wife as his second wife will go to hell after death if he sleeps with her. If he happens to procreate with her, he will lose his caste and acquire her caste. Should this make us deduce that losing caste was worse than going to hell from Manu? Anuloma and Pratuloma today can be today can be seen all over the world. The only difference is that instead of caste, the status of groom is determined by his financial standing vis-a-vis by the bride. So now we are talking about the modern India. There was a time when Manu decides that with whom you have to marry and with whom you not to marry. And now in modern India, people thinks that to whom they want to marry and not to marry. Like the first quality here is now the things girls seeks the person who is richer from them, who can afford their all expenses, and their life should go on very smoothly. So they think that richer person would be much better for them, whether it is of any caste. So in this way, the only difference is that instead of caste, the status of groom is determined by his financial standing vis-a-vis the bride. The first one is called hypergamy in our times and is also called marrying up in common parlance. It is commonly observed that women marry men who are above them in financial status, and hypergamy is the aim of most women in life. The modern equivalent of pratiloma is called hypogamy, or emotional foolishness, when a woman does it according to the most well-wishers. One quasi-famous, here we can give some ideas where some actress tries to get married a person who is more richer than her, so that she can pass on her life smoothly with all the luxuries of life, with all the things of enjoyment and all. So some place in an interview, actress says, more successful, more famous, better knowing, and richer than me. This is the qualification of a man to get married to her. So in this way, the things now has been changed a lot. Manu also mentions 8 types of weddings. It is very important that what were the types of wedding at that time. So there were 8 types of wedding which were prevailing in ancient India. 4 were permissible marriages and the other 4 were non-permissible marriages. The first one was Brahma Vivaha, means wedding rites followed by Lord Brahma and by Brahmanas. In this way of conducting wedding, the father of the bride gives her away to a knower of the Vedas, invited by the father himself after decorating the bride with jewelry and fine clothes. This type of wedding finds resonance in the modern system, where the father of an eligible girl looks for a highly educated groom. Little do such parents realize that they are imitated other parents who lived in ancient times. The modern modifications to this system is that the desirable groom must also be financially successful. This renders the analogy meaningless, as knowers of the Vedas in ancient times were almost invariably poor. The second one was the Deva Vivaha. So the rites followed by the gods. In this type of wedding, the father of the bride gives her away to the officiating priest at a yajna or yagya, or sacrifice, while the yajna is going on. Third one was the Arsh Vivaha, the rites of the rishis. In this type of Hindu wedding, the father of the bride gives her away to a groom who gives to the father 1 cow and 1 bull, or 2 cows or 2 bull. The fourth one was Prajapatya Vivaha, wedding a la Prajapatyas. In this type of wedding, the father of the bride gives her away to any groom after blessing the couple and honoring the groom. This is also fairly common today, and a combination of this and part of the first type appears to be prevalent in ritual weddings in India. Asura Vivaha, this one was the 5th type, and not permissible, but people do this also. In this type of Hindu wedding, the groom voluntarily gives as much money and gifts as he can afford to give to the bride and to her family in order to get her consent for marriage. Like it was a kind to purchase a bride for marriage. Then the 6th one was the Gandhar Vivaha. It can be said as the love marriage without the permission of the family. So in this type of marriage, a man seduced a woman and takes her as his wife by virtue of the seduction without any rights whatsoever. This is simply the another name for the eternal dance between men and women. The seventh one was the Rakshasa Vivaha. In this type of wedding, the killer or assaulter of a woman's family's member or father takes her as his wife by kidnapping and raping her. This may have the added highlight of a man breaking into the women's house. So this is called assault, kidnapping, dacoity, and rape today. Any man who perpetrates this stand a great chance of getting free government hospitality for the rest of his life. If killing is a part of wedding, then the government is pretty much guaranteed to provide a free ride to another region of the universe these days to a lucky go. Peshacha Vivaha. It means in this type of wedding, a man rapes a sleeping or intoxicated, imbecile woman. This is the bestest of all the methods and is forbidden on pain of incurring grave demerit. So these all were the 8 kinds of marriages which were prevalent at that time in ancient India. And Manu also mentions the merit or demerit earned by entering marriage via which of these types of methods. He details out the numbers of generations of ancestors and descendants whose soul and sons born out of such marriages can save by acting virtuously. He adumbrates the various ways and times in which a man may approach his wife sexually. He talks extensively about the castes of children born from intercaste marriages. Manu also talks about the honor and endowments which are very women's due, and declares that the family or society where women are not honored will be destroyed in short order. Here I would like to quote from the Manu's word that Yatra Naryastu Pujyante Ramante Tatra Devta. He decrees those forms of marriage in which the father of the bride accepts gifts from the groom. He makes no mention of dowry, though he praises fathers who adorn their daughters with fine clothes and jewelry, as he does similarly praise husbands, brothers, and sons. People who have seen wedding rituals might remember that the father of the bride declared at the time of giving her away to the groom that he had dressed her up in fine clothes and jewelry to the best of his ability. So in this way, here I would like to finish talk about Manu and Manu Smriti. Now I will focus on some points in Hindu code bill that what we have taken from Manu Smriti. And nowadays also, while we are having any case in court related to the Hindu law, we try to follow the rules and regulations provided by Manu and Manu Smriti. But as you have seen, some places Manu have stopped women to be freed from the bonds of family, from the bonds of husband, sons, and fathers. So nowadays the feminist also sometimes says that Manu is not that much suitable for our society nowadays, and things has been changed. It was the past when the things were going on like that. So it is very important to understand, and constitution also given opportunity to women to live free life, to follow their life as they want, and in this way we can understand the Hindu code bill also. So I would like to summarize here that this is my interpretation related to Manu and what we have taken from Manu to the Hindu code bill, and all the marriages and their controversies has been decided by this Manu Smriti, as we decided in Shariat, in Muslims marriage proposals and their controversies. So I would like to thank Valentina and Gian also, and all the dignitaries present over here. Thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity to share my views with all of you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Anita. So for me, so I'm sure that it is quite true that this topic is a real pain. It's a latent and also burning topic. We understand, but not so much. We read a lot about this problem, but only, I think, Western point of view. So I think it's so latent to the topic that we should much more discuss. And it's very interesting for us because we're a department of history of law and state, and as I said, we are learning, Manu, and for me this legal document is really interesting because it's very poetic as document, of course, but we should speak also about real life and about real rights. And I think your struggle is very feministic, and I wish that you would be in all our projects. Thank you very much. You are the very great speaker, and it was all super, but very dramatic topic, of course. So, dear guests, have any questions for dear Anita? Some questions? I want to say excuse for Dr. Mutam Bara because I didn't see her question. She wants to ask something. Oh, okay. Please, Chanuji.
Yes, well, I thank you very much, Professor Rosani, for your wonderful exposition, and many points were really very interesting for me. I would have a particular question, that is, perhaps I lost it. I would be interested in how the text that Manu judges the property for women outside the marriage and inside the marriage. There are articles on this point or not? I would be interested in it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Gyan sir. It is very interesting to know about the property rights of women. It is a very discussed matter also. That in ancient India it was a very great matter. Suppose women becomes widow. So at that time, what was the ritual? At that time, they used to do that the women can get married to the family member, any family member where she was married, because this was only not to distribute the property to some other person. They want to stop the property in the family only. And at the time of marriage, father gives some gifts, and vahatu, we say it vahatu means some gifts. Nowadays we can say it dowry, so that the girl starting a new life can spend a life in a better way. So people has not given that much freedom to the rights of property to the women. The only thing which women can have was the ornaments, the jewelry she was wearing, and clothes. That was the stridhana, means women's property. So only the jewelry can be a part of women's property, not the landed property or unmovable property. So in ancient time, only in Vedic period we have some free hand in this way. Otherwise, in ancient time, it was very much restricted for women to have proper property. The property belongs to the sons and father only. Thank you, sir.
Some more questions? No? Okay.
Thank you, Valentina,
So,
for giving me this opportunity. It
thank
was
you.
a wonderful
Yeah,
experience. It was a
thank you
wonderful
very much.
experience to share. Thank you.
Mhm. So, Janita, you should know that we know about violence and in India about victimization of women, and of course, for us are much more interesting. If you will all write about this, you will make article or several articles, and we first of all read and publish. For me, it's as my pay, because I love India so much, and I hope that everything will be okay. But we see right now is the next century, and the problems are the same as it was. So I hope you good luck and to be in this struggle. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to all.
Mhm. Okay, and we will go to another our field of our discussion. I would like to introduce another factor into our discussion, and it is much more closer with the rights, human rights. And so our next speaker is about speaking about criminal policy, and it is Ms. Haydarova Azizaz Hon, and the title is Principle of Legality in Criminal Policy of the Republic of Tajikistan, respective analysis and humanitarian basis.
Thank you so much. So, good afternoon, dear colleague. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer of the conference, and special big thanks to Valentina Gennadievna for invitation to participate. So, in spite of coronavirus, or how can you say, Corona 2019, and all the limitation, ban, you were able to organize such an event. So before me were very interesting topic, very interesting about very how can I say? I got all of info about Manu, Code of India. So now I would like to tell you about implementation of this of the principle of legality in modern criminal policy of the Republic of Tajikistan. So legality at all times was one of the most complex political and legal phenomena. For public life, legality is the method of state leadership. In order for the rule of law to perform all functions, it is necessary to have a perfect, stable legal basis. At the same time, the law cannot be represented outside of legal relations. The way the law excites if it is implemented and effectively regulated social relations and affect the conscience and behavior of people. The approach is necessary to improve the criminal law and other legal institutions because the ideas of reasonably structure of law, justice, equality, humanism, and legality are always embodied in public legal conscience. These ideas constitute the principles of criminal law. The principles of criminal are formed on the basis of the principles of legal conscience and are conditioned conditioned by the social phenomena taking place in the Republic of Tajikistan, which are regulated by criminal law while defining its boundaries and content. At the same time, they are directly related to the implementation of the rights and freedoms of citizens who fall within the scope of the criminal law. Over the past decade, radical changes have taken place in the state and political systems of society, in the economy, culture, and social life of the country. The reforms in the state have led to the improvement of criminal legislation, one of the priority provisions of criminal law and the most important means of ensuring the rights and freedoms of citizens in the Republic of Tajikistan is the legislative consolidation of the principle of legality. However, the theory of criminal law hasn't yet resolved a number of complex issues requiring scientific understanding of issues directly related to the principle of legality and its implementation. The principle of legality is regulated by Article 4 of the Criminal Code of the Republic of Tajikistan as a fundamental idea of criminal law, which in turn predetermines the need to create reliable guarantees for its implementation. The legality doesn't have its content, but its means of expressing not only the basic general legal principles, but also the acceptance of the law as whole. The criminal law principle of legality is a specific form of expression of social and legal ideas of equality, humanism, justice, and guilt in criminal law. Implementation problems of the legality principle in the norms of the general part of criminal code of the Republic of Tajikistan, according to the content of Article 1 of the Criminal Code of the Republic of Tajikistan, the only source of criminal law is the criminal law, and this provision is also enshrined in Part 1 of Article 3 of the Criminal Code of the Republic of Tajikistan. However, in accordance with Article 20 of the Criminal Code of the Republic of Tajikistan, the criminality and punishability of an act are determined by the criminal law in force at the time the act was committed. That is, in fact, if a person committed a crime before the adoption of the Criminal Code of the Republic of Tajikistan in 1998, for example, during the period of the Criminal Code of the Tajik SSR in 1961, then the criminality and punishability of the committed act will be regulated by this criminal code, with the exception of cases provided for in Article 20 of the Criminal Code of the Republic of Tajikistan. Problems of the implementation of the principle of legality in the norms of the special part of the Criminal Code of the Republic of Tajikistan examine the main problems of the implementation of the principle of legality in the norms of the special part of the Criminal Code of the Republic of Tajikistan. So, all people have equal rights to fundamental values: life, freedom, honor, dignity, inviolability. Criminal legislation should be as far as possible educatively reflecting reality. Only under this condition can the fulfillment of the main purpose of the criminal law be guaranteed. the protection of the rights and freedoms of citizens as well as the protection of the interests of society and the state from criminal encroachment. Summing up the study of the category of legality, the general legal principle of legality can be defined as a principle according to which all subjects of public relations must strictly and unswervingly comply with legal norms expressed in laws and other regulatory legal acts, as well as in other sources of law. So, thanks to your attention. I try to be very shortly because my field of a bit another, and that's why I hope you got interest about my topic. So I need your questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you very much, dear Aziza. So I would like to say that Tajikistan has a great culture and the great historical heritage, and I want that next time you will talk about only legal policy, so without criminal. And I wish you that you solve all the problems, but the life is another, and we should speak about it. So very interesting. And some questions for Aziza. Maybe
questions to Professor Aziza. Professor Aziza,
okay.
If we compare the interpretation of these principles in Soviet law on Tajikistan law today, may we say what we see more difference in this understanding of these principles?
Between two courts, old and new courts, I mean, criminal law of Tajik SR 1961 and Criminal Code Republic of Tajikistan 1998. Between two articles, no more different. So just how can I say? So the principle of legality is regulated by Article 4, Criminal Code of Republic of Tajikistan, the fundamental idea of criminal law, which in turn determines the need to create a reliable guarantees for its implementation. I mean, not more different, so a bit now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your answer.
And some more questions? So let me introduce our next speaker. Thank you very much, Aziza. And it's near your topic. It's about marginalized communities, and it's also the victims and somebody criminal subjects. And so our next speaker is dear Mia Suzan. Is she here?
Hello, yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Thank you very much. So the next speaker, Mia Suzan, marginalized communities and justice, mercy, this justice, according to Abrahamic traditionals. Please, you're welcome.
Thank you, Valentina. Actually, my background is architecture. I'm a landscape architect, and I study how society can be inclusive, and I study the marginalized community. Marginalized community meaning that the communities that are considered minorities, that how they can be included in the society. And I'm not a qualified lawyer, so I'm not saying in terms of a lower perspective that I'm an architect, but as an architect, I consider that cities are not just for buildings, cities are for people. So we should consider people and we should learn people. So that is the beginning of my study. So my birth country is Myanmar, and I have a little Indian descendant. So the presentation that Dr. Anita presented was it goes to my heart, but I'm mostly Burmese. But then I am a minority in Myanmar, and then when I moved to Malaysia 10 years ago, I become the majority because of my faith. So I consider this us against them problem become irrelevant, because sometimes I'm the minority and sometimes I'm the majority. So this become the irrelevant problem for me. And then I started to decide to study pluralism and how we can create inclusive societies in terms of built environment. So the Latvian professor Isaiah Berling made a brilliant essay on hedgehog and the fox, where he say hedgehog is the person who only see one thing, one big thing, meaning that my truth is the only truth and everybody else is wrong. So these are the kind of people that we consider hedgehogs. And then he talked about somebody like a fox. A fox is somebody who sees something from a lot of perspectives and who knows a lot of angles and a lot of viewpoints. And he says we need these kind of people in the society who can see things in a lot of perspectives to be able to solve our problems. Otherwise, if we see and if we think only one way, my truth is the only truth, then we are not going to solve any problems. So the word pluralism that he used was interesting for me, and I started to go more into this study. Many of the minority or the marginalized communities, one of them, the Dr. G and the other, they discuss the Amish community or Rohingya communities in my own country, or the Roma community of Europe, or Yazidis in Iraq. So these are like the worst case scenarios. But then there are the regular minorities that we consider we cannot see, but they are there in every society, either because of the class, because of the gender, because of the skin color, because of the race or religion, or sometimes because of the age, or sometimes because they are immigrants, or sometimes because they are disabled. There are many categories that you can marginalize people, and we cannot like say like our community is fine, there's nothing wrong with us, because that's not true. It's not heaven. In our on earth there are wrong things, and we should try to understand, and we should try to fix that. So when minorities are not considered properly and the clashes got worse, there will be revolutions, like undeniably. So then when those kind of revolutions occur, the order and the rule of law will change, and a lot of disruptions occur in our society. So we should consider and think about and talk to the minority communities. So when things get tough for them, there will be uprisings. But when, like, if you like see one of the studies that like Dr. Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, those people are from the minority communities. And I wonder, why are those leaders only from minority communities, and why can't the majority communities start to initiate through the minorities so that these things can be avoided? Why should only the minorities speak up for them? Why can't the majority give a hand to the minorities to avoid these things could happen? So there is another word that is familiar in my study, is called pseudo-speciation. That is that the study done by Eric Erikson, the German psychologist. He used this pseudo-speciation is the word of otherizing, right, a certain cultural group. So one pseudo-species, without that, we cannot fight with another community. So meaning that pseudo-speciation is the term that when we want to dehumanize or belittle another type of people. So without that, we cannot go to war or we cannot aggress other people. So to be able to fight with another group of people, you need to think that they are somewhat lower than us. Without that mentality, you cannot go to war with them. If you think these people are your brothers and sisters or your colleagues and your neighbors and your family, you really cannot go to war with them. So this word pseudo-speciation is a word that come to my mind in this presentation. And of course, how it relates to built environment, right? But why is it like involved in built environment as an architect? Why is it important? Because as a society, we produce what a society as a whole is obsessed with. So, for instance, in the past, the Muslim community were obsessed with geometry or Euclids, and so you can see all these geometric shapes in their cities. Like for Russians, they produce very beautiful theaters because art and science is very important to them. Myanmar people, like their temples are beautiful because they are like they're sacred places are very important to them. So we produce like beautiful things to the things that are important to us. And but modern architecture, if we see, is just about showing up, you know, like standing tall. But we don't see these kind of essences anymore. And this loss of essence is something that troubles me. So I think we in urban planning, we should study people because cities are about people. And so this is just the beginning of my study. And I'm here mostly as a student to listen to you all instead of giving a preach or a speech. But yeah, like for instance, Robert Frost's American poet say, half the world is composed of people who have things to say and but cannot say, and the other half keep saying things but they have nothing to say. So how do we fix that? Yeah, so the lawyers and the people who study law are the ones who speak up for the ones who cannot say things. So I am here as a great admirer of everybody here, and instead of giving a lecture, I think I'm a better listener here. But another, if I could speak to the students here, like to share a book, Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. That is a book that I recently read, and I find it interesting because he said morality binds and blinds. There's two things. It binds at two in ideological teams that fight against each other, though the fate of the world depend on our side winning each battle. But on the other hand, why it blinds us? It blinds us into the fact that each team is composed of good people who have something important to say. So like it's a very interesting idea that he presented over there. And of course, Thomas Aquinas, St. Thomas Aquinas said that the more one knows, the greater one's desire to know more. So we should know about this other group of people that we consider the other. And Quran says, we created nations and tribes so that you may know one another. So to know one another is a virtue, it's a gift, and it's a privilege. And in terms of justice over mercy, most of the Abrahamic traditions pursue justice over mercy because there are suffering in the world, and most of the faith-based tradition is this: there is a hurricane out there, but there is an eye of a hurricane where you can find peace in there. So those of the faith traditions are asking you to be in that eye of the hurricane. So justice is important, but justice is necessary only in the absence of love. So how do we pursue love? So Prophet Muhammad said, those who do not show mercy will not be shown. So if you're wise, you will not pursue justice. Instead, you will rather pursue for love and mercy. That is my understanding. But this is just the beginning of my study, and I'm studying marginalized groups, how they can be integrated into urban planning. But thanks for having me here today.
Thank you very much. I think that it is much more interesting for us as a lawyers to hear your opinion, because this scientific methodological seminar is for all. And for me, your topic is very difficult. And I think that a lawyer couldn't do such amusing report as you, and I suppose that you write everything, you will write everything, and we will discuss it in our publication. Could we? Because you have you said about a lot of problems, and have asked us so much, and we need some time, and I think it's the great discussion for publication and for journal publication. Would we make like this
maybe because what my understanding is that people should write only the things that they know and they have mastered. You know, I am like at the beginning of my career, and I'm not like I'm not into writing so much yet. Of course, definitely I will someday, but this is the beginning of my journey. For instance, as a minority in Myanmar, the things that I study are completely different from the things that I study in Malaysia. For instance, minority community in Malaysia would be like Chinese community, Indian community, and the ethnic communities, right? Chinese community in the built environment that they consider like feng shui, like how the environment and people can live with together. So these things are like, everything is like new to me, and I'm like in a Alice in Wonderland. So I'm not very sure much about writing yet, but definitely I'm studying, and yeah, I would love to be engaged in more of this sort of events, but writing, I will think about it.
Yeah, but not in a scientific field. You could also write as a as a journalist. Yeah. So, for example, some social problems, because I believe you know much more better this problem, and when we will read about it, we can explain maybe something, or maybe discuss, because I think that the real publication is when author is introduced in this publication. And we have many opportunities, and don't worry, I think this topic is very interesting because it's your topic. And for me, I want to say once again, so this problem is very difficult. So thank you very much. Is anybody wants to make some questions?
Or maybe suggestions would be very welcome, because I'm a very new.
I think suggestions, no, because it's very big topic. Yeah, you say you said about so much problems that everybody right now only
don't want
thinks,
to talk anymore.
yeah, it's very difficult. So because for me it's very interesting how you explain everything, your words, and it's very you have very beautiful language, and I suppose you will be very good writer, and you should write.
I'm thinking about it, but I'm giving like maybe 10 years, you know, because like when I read things that these crazy people write that I cannot, I don't want to be one of those persons, but I'm trying. Yes. Yes, Dr.
We
G,
will help you, okay? Because no, it's no problems. You have a lot of ideas. It is the most important. Okay, dear guests. So
So a little bit discussion or next topic.
Yes, please. Dr. Ian has something to say.
I can just have a question, a short remark. I am personally very much interested in the question of the architecture and of the planning of the cities, because this is an aspect which sometimes at least is not does not receive the due measure, the due weight, the due attention. Actually, I have experienced that in history, both architecture as such and the planification of towns can be a terrible weapon for the marginalization of some people. For instance, if we take into consideration the planning of New York between the years 30 years up to the 60 years of the past century, it was terrible what was done to the Afro-American people, because through a system of loans against the Afro-American people, through a system of planning of the town, of the roads, of the streets, and of our construction of new architectures, it was made so that Afro-American people was translated into ghettos, which was not before the 30s. People was rather relatively at least mixed with each other. They coexist with each other, but the politics of the planning of the town, not so much of the major, but of the department for the planning of the town, and personally of Robert Moses, between then in those 30 years, it was a terrible policy of marginalization of Afro-American people, which were already inhabitants of the country and which were arriving to New York in order to live there. And I think that this aspect, at least for me, it was rather new. That is, I didn't think, at least up to not so much time ago, how the politics of marginalization of people and of minorities can be implemented by the planning of towns, by the loans, by the tax policy, of course, and by the architecture itself. On the other way around, of course, architecture and the correct planning of the towns can contribute, can give a foundational contribution to the mutual comprehension and mutual living of people. That was what I wanted to say. Thank you, of course, for your brilliant contribution. Thank you.
Yes, of course. If I could say a bit as well. Of course, you were asking how this marginalized community can be a part of architecture, and of course, you were mentioning Robert Moses. Yes, Robert Moses. He was a big opponent of Jane Jacobs. If you have ever read the person called Jane Jacobs, she was a very revolutionary urban planner, even though she has no diploma on her side. But she wrote a very interesting book called Great American Cities. And Robert Moses, like when he wants to build new cities as an architect, he tried to destroy all these marginalized communities, like Italian villages, Chinatown and all those areas he destroy. And he wants to, of course, like when you want to build area, you call the slums and the minorities. Yeah, you don't care about the minorities, and you want to move everything for the sake of the new development. So she was the one who was fighting against him, and he was making this. There was a very interesting article. Maybe you could find on YouTube, or there's a documentary about her as well. I think you will find it interesting. Her book, Jane Jacobs. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. And our next topic and next speaker is about also real life, creating a concept of a situational law. It is the practical lawyer, Tsibule Jan. So, dear Jan.
Hello, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank very much for the invitation on this international seminar. I will talk about creating the concept of situation law as I see it and what's bothering me about it. It's a long time since I fall in love with the law. It became my passion. When I was reading in the law codex how beautiful it sounds in the law books, then law cannot be break. How in theory the system seems to be perfectly, but everybody knows from the real life that we have a different experience, and I was always trying to find out the reason why is it so. I want to talk about the situational law which arises in a specific process. I mean situations like when you buy a house, sell a car, take the loan in the bank, or asking the government for any kinds of pensions. The law in the books is almost perfectly. You can find solutions for almost every situation. So what's the problem? In my opinion, the first of all is a human factor. I mean, people which working somehow with the law could be, let's say, not paid well. They losing motivation working properly. A human could be tired from too much work. They could feel frustrated. And the result we can know very well in some cases. They could be not enough educated, incorrectly instructed by their directors. Why I think it became in this way? It's because that is how is it in reality. I had opportunity to compare life in different countries with a different law system, like in Cyprus, on Austria, in Slovakia, which I am from. So to give my thoughts on this, I have to go a little bit back in history. At the end of the 20th century in Czechoslovakia, in 80s, the law system was more stable. People used to feel safe about their tomorrows. Then came the year 89, fall of the system. The law was also fall. It was a start of creating a new law system, and the problem starts. That time, the law system had a lot of holes because the law itself had no experience with the situation, which brings a new democratic system. It starts to be attacked with the situation which was not exist before. Criminal world start to use them for making money. That time there was no regulation for so many kinds of economic frauds. Here we can again talk about the situational law a bit from a different side. Like the situation creates a law. Unfortunately, here the law stayed behind. But that doesn't mean that we cannot make it better. It just takes a little bit more time. Let's say in Cyprus, the law is much influenced with the South culture. That what make it so different. And again, a new situation which came from the new millennium. Everything changed. I mean, in Cyprus before, let's say in 19 and 2000, Cyprus was absolutely safe country. The citizens at the time, they didn't feel necessary to lock their houses, to lock their cars. Nobody was stealing anything. But the situation changed and started to arriving many foreign people for the work. And again, the situation have to be changing and the law starting to be changing again. Again, we see the same, that the situation creating a law. But let's say in Austria, we see a little bit different picture. Here, the law had opportunity to continually grow for a long period, which means the law became more precise, that all the society have a benefit from it in the culture. I mean, and especially the quality of life. It's very good. It could be our goals. I mean, the direction where we want to move in the future. About this topic, we can talk many hours and take it from a different view of points. And I'm sure that you will have a different meaning, which is so important. This is just my view of point, and as I will study this problematic more, I will be able to understand it better, and even just, I hope I could be able to eliminate the differences between law in the book and the law in the real life. I try to be as short as possible because this topic, as I said, is so great, so huge. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, dear Jan. Your presentation is really as well clear. Oh, excuse me, I have some technical problems once again. Dear Gianluigi, could you help me and some questions from you?
Of course, yes. Can I speak? May I speak? Can you hear me? Because, do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Because, well, yes, thank you very much for your very interesting contribution. I would like to know something more about the difference between the period before 1989 and the period thereafter, because it is your contents were new for me. I found them they are very interesting, and I would like to have some more orientation on the problem. Thank you, if it's possible. I know that it is a huge theme, a huge subject, but well, I would like to know something more. Also, because I am now I'm not there, but most of the year I live in Vienna, and so Slovakia is next to us. We are very many times in Bratislava, for instance, and which is a wonderful city among other things. And I do not know this aspect you have mentioned, in spite of the fact that of course in Austria there is much attention to Slovakia. But this subject is new for me. I was really surprised, and I thank you very much indeed for your contribution, because it opened a new horizon for me. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Yes, you're right. Austria and Vienna is close to us. It's just 60 kilometers from Bratislava. And why I choose Austria? I used to live there for not a long time, but it was enough to become like friend with the Austrian law system. About your question, okay, it's very huge, but I will try to explain how I see it. I mean, before 89, the law was much different as is now. Why? So, okay, it was a different system. It was communism. And this system, we can talk about this even a long time, but I think that time we didn't have problems with the crime. I mean, there was a crime, of course, but not so huge like is it now, because we came to the new democratic system, and law was learning, and is for me is like a child, and he's slowly growing up, and all this criminal was using this problem. So in this time, it's always we're trying to make it better and better, and we're looking for the countries. We're taking the best from everywhere to make it better. But to explain it one by one is for me not possible now, because it's so huge. I don't even know where to go to economical, or to go to human rights, or you want to hear about a criminal law. But as you said, it's very interesting topic.
Thank you very much. If we have some more questions for Jan.
Only an addition, a short addition. In your opinion, is the country taking advantage from the separation of the Czech Republic, or in your opinion, as regards these kinds of problems, the situation has become worse? That is, which is your evaluation of the phenomenon of the separation between among the two countries?
If I understood right, you want to ask about the Czechoslovakia, why is separate? Is how I see it.
the question is, was, in your opinion, the situation about the criminality better also because the country had a greater administration and so had the Czechoslovakia, our country, or the separation has not had any effect on the increasing of criminality? Is there is a connection with it, or it is quite independent on this problem?
Yes, for sure there is a connection, because when we was one country, I mean Czechoslovakia, we was more strong. I mean, we could solve the problem more easily. But as we separate, it became more difficult, of course. Everything became more difficult, because if you separate something, it's always not so strong like it could be before. But about the integration in the European Union, I think it's a great thing, not just for us, but for everyone, because we can help each other in all kinds of problem, and especially also with the crimes, because with integration we can take more experience from the countries which are in democratics many years. I mean, these things, I think it was very good.
Okay, thank you very much, Jan, and thank you for your presentation. And the next topic and the next discussion is about theory of law, but theory with a practical opinion also. So next presentation, myths of normativism, Eugen Ehrlich, vs. Hans Kelsen. So dear Pauline.
I'm here. Okay, thank you very much one more time for your invitation. Today I will try to explain, let's say I will talk about myths of normativism, and this is about Eugen Ehrlich vs. Hans Kelsen. In Ehrlich's view, this conception of law only could recognize law produced or sanctioned by the state law, or simply statute law. In this conception of law, the basic legal norms which order society are set by the legislature. The role of the judiciary is limited to apply these norms to individual cases, and only according to the original intent of the legislature. In the rare case when the existing law is unclear or silent, a judge may turn to societal norms and give them recognition as customary law. Otherwise, they would be in law non-existent. For Ehrlich, the story of the law does not end with the state and its officials, nor does it begin there. One of the main reasons that it does not end with the state is precisely because, according to him, it does not begin there. So this is a circle, I think. On the example of the United States of America, of necessity, they attribute to the judges the function of the interpretation and construction. Construction of the written law, as they are sometimes surprisingly reminded, is only a special instance of interpretation. Interpretation broadly describes the office of the judge and imports into that office the character of lawgiver, no matter whether the law is derived from some well-known outer field or a source more obscure. Courts make the law in both a real and a technical sense. Indispensable to any definition of law as an enforceable rule of human conduct is the element of authority. The thing which enables it to take toll of person, liberty or property, whether the rule goes back to Napoleon or Justinian, Christ, Moses, Hammurabi, or at the dead end of precedent, it's just plucked out of the blue. It becomes law when officially pronounced or applied under the imprimatur of some agency of the government clothed with jurisdictional power. According to Kelsen, the phenomenon of law can be approached from two different perspectives. On the one hand, the law can be conceived of as a norm, that is, a rule that articulates a specific kind of something has to be done or not be done, like to be or not to be. On the other hand, the law may be taken as a part of social reality, as a fact or an occurrence that takes place regularly. Here, the law takes the form of an sein, proposition with respect to human behavior. Some action is done or not done on a regular basis. These two perspectives correspond with the two different disciplines from which law can be studied. Respectively, a normative science of law that determines deductively, as I hope it was right, which rules are valid, and an explanatory sociology of law that establish inductively a certain regularity for which it tries to find a causal explanation. So in this, we can see this way that's why Kelsen's ideas in the American legal scientific community didn't get any support when he moved there. His pure theory of law did not arouse any significant interest in the United States. Kelsen criticized Ehrlich for trying to combine what he considered are incompatible perspectives, because Ehrlich seemed to waver between an empirical conception of law in which law is a fact and the observable regularity that is subject to the laws of causality on the one hand, and a normative conception of law in which law is a norm that evades empirical observation and causal explanation on the other. At the start of his expose, Ehrlich wrote, "Now it is true that the rule of conduct is not only a rule according to which men customarily regulate their conduct, but also a rule according to which they ought to do so." As if stunned by B, Kelsen reacted, "Evidently, this sentence is wrong." They have so much big polemic. According to Kelsen, a rule that contains on the factual level a causal explanation does not give any clue on the normative level what ought to be done. Of course, there may be norms that prescribe a certain behavior that has been practiced for a long time. However, norms like this, in which customary law is embedded, contain prescriptions and not explanations for specified kinds of behavior. From the fact that something used to be done, it doesn't follow logically that this should be done. That presupposes a legal, ethical, logical, or other norm, which states that you ought to do what you used to do. Only in diving power, the normative and the factual may constitute, because for those who believe, he wants the good to be and the bad not to be. So I will conclude, because during my report, I got some ideas from the air, from atmosphere, because, normally I have I specialized in mediation, so how I can conclude, I made a kind of mediation procedure between scientists. Ehrlich and Kelsen.
Okay, very interesting mediation. A new form.
So something like this. So if you have some questions, but you know, because I will use different articles, science articles, so maybe it's a little bit difficult even for me sometimes when I start to read, but to explain, of course.
But I hope that Hans Kelsen is in our heart. Next year is his year, so 140th year, so his birth, and so we will make this discussion much more next time, and it will be very active. So, dear guests, have any questions for dear Pauline? Maybe our friends, Dr. Mutambara wants to say something.
Talahma? Me?
Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. You talked that your field area, it's about mediation, yeah?
Yes.
Can I ask you on mediation?
Okay.
I'm asking about the mediation clause. What's the legal impact of mediation clause in your country? The legal impact, the enforceability of mediation clause. It is a mandatory or voluntary?
You know, right now I'm in Russia, so to be, I mean, if the conditions, right, about mediators, you know, this is a different, you can be a professional and non-professional mediator. And for example, how I know in different countries, for example, also I've been in Turkey before, so to be mediator, to become a mediator, to start this practice, you have to be, first of all, lawyer. Not lawyer, but you have to get special education, I mean, in law. But in Russia, to be mediator, this is not a condition. I mean, not everyone, but for example, I know some colleagues here from Russia, from Kazakhstan. They have a psychological degree, sociological degree, something like this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And so our question, much more, no? Okay, so thank you for Dr. Halit Talahma. And so our next presentation, so let's talk with the moderators. And our next presentation is by Gianluigi. So maybe you present yourself, Gianluigi.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for the possibility of speaking. I hope you can hear me good. I think up to now it should have functioned rather well. I hope it will continue that way. I see that you have prepared for me a short PowerPoint. Yes, thank you very much. You see individual rights, self rights, cultural rights, genesis, and extent. The problem is the question of its contribution is, in general, whether there should be only individual rights, whether there are only individual rights are possible, that is, rights acknowledged only to individuals and not to groups, or on the contrary, whether there should be also group rights, that is, rights conceded to groups, and in this case, which rights particularly, and whether there can be a compatibility between individual rights and group rights, or whether there should be contradictions between the two kinds of rights. And the problem is, in general case, so to speak, group rights did not found very many attention after World War II, because the countries which founded and then entered the United Nations were of the opinion, they believed, and they were also right, at least up to a certain measure, that the concerning group rights could have brought to contrasts and contradictions and then to wars between different populations, as was the case of the aggressive politics of the Nazi Germany before World War II and then during World War II. And therefore, up to a certain point, group rights were considered as to be a danger for peace, a danger for the stability of the international system, international council system. Then the debate was opened up, so to speak, from the 70 years onward. I would say that I could perhaps go, but anyway, I do not need so much of the PowerPoint. They can speak also without PowerPoint, but if you have some pages also, I can directly comment on them. Otherwise, there is no problem. There are so the debate now from the 70 years of the past century onwards has exploded. There are thinkers who consider necessary, indispensable to extend, at least in a certain measure, rights for growth. There are thinkers who say, no, this is a danger, and there are thinkers who say, well, yes and no, we have to discuss them. In order to make some examples, I can quote you, for instance, the first from the scholar Will Kumlicka, who is a Canadian. He was born in 1962. He teaches in Canada, and he is a convinced assertor of the necessity of having at least a certain number of growth rights for growth. There are, on the contrary, theoreticians who say no, this is rather a danger. For instance, Brian Barry, the late Brian Barry, he died some years ago, has always been rather skeptical of the possibility of making a compatibility between individual rights and group rights. He has tendentially always thought that group rights would put in danger the individual rights because they would give a power to group over the individuals members of the same group. There are others who say, for instance, it is the case of Dorian Coleman, who is professor of law in the United States. She has written important articles about the compatibility in the system of law. Here is the system of US law, which is analyzed, but of course, her reflection can be extended to every system of law. She has pointed out in some articles the dangers which could originate if, for the protection of the individuals in the system of law, within the system of law, if determined cultural components of other cultures are introduced in the US American law. And we will see perhaps how, whether if the time will constrain us. The argument, the subject is, as you can see also from this short introduction, huge. It is a huge debate, a huge question. I think, yes, yeah, you have written something about this question in the PowerPoint, in this short PowerPoint. Thank you very much for your work. And you, yeah, more or less I said everything about this point of the this page of the PowerPoint. You can go downwards. I can perhaps begin my exposition anyway by quoting you some of the main thoughts of Kumlicka about Will Kumlicka, the Canadian thinker, the Canadian professor, about the question of the growth rights and why growth rights are so important, why the acknowledgement of growth rights for growth it is so important. Perhaps as a short introduction, we can immediately understand why growth rights are important for Kumlicka and for his special environment. He is a Canadian, and Canada has to do always, day for day, with the presence of two different linguistic and cultural components, the French component and the English component. And if you cannot find a kind of mediation and coexistence, the possibility of coexistence between the two components, you cannot have a unitary state. So, of course, there are also those in Canada who say, no, let's separate Canada, French Canada from English Canada, and that's all. We have two nations, we have two countries, two independent countries, and that is the end. For instance, Brian Barry, who you can find here in the bibliography for his work, Brian Barry, who is tendentially thinking, has always been tendentially thinking that there is no mediation possible if you have two people with two different languages, with two different cultures, with two different traditions. There is no mediation possible. Best way is to separate the two countries from each other. So you will have a French Canada, French-speaking Canada, and English-speaking Canada. The same thing said Brian Barry, for instance, as regards the case of Belgium in Europe. Since you have got a Flame component in the north of Belgium and a French component in the south of Belgium, he says always there is no mediation possible. The two components cannot in the long time coexist with each other, and therefore the best thing is to say, let's separate Belgium in two parts, and that's all. That's the end of the problem. Kumlicka, who is a Canadian, has another perspective, that is, he thinks it is possible to coexist. It is possible to have two different languages, two different nations in the same country without particular problems. Of course, problems are there, but they can be solved. But the only way to solve this is to guarantee some growth, some rights, for instance, the teaching rights or school rights or the right to grow up in one's own culture to the members of the different groups. The important point in Kumlicka, in the way of thinking of Kumlicka, is that he speaks, of course, of group rights, and he pleads for group rights. He pleads vehemently for group rights, but first of all, of course, he is ready to acknowledge group rights only under the strict condition that the group to which a particular right is conceded are respectful of the individual right. That is, you cannot say, well, I give this group X these and these rights, but without that I have any interest for the fundamental individual rights of the individual. That is, if the group to which rights are conceded respect individual rights, for instance, to self-determination, to autonomy, to culture, to live a free life. If the group respects these rights, then can the group receive group rights. Otherwise, not. This is the first point of Kumlicka's meditation on group rights and of their limitation and possibility. The second point of cumulata, which is, in my opinion, very interesting, of course, very much debated on, discussed on, and criticized, of course, but very interesting, is that it does not consider group rights as something essentially different from individual rights. That is, to concede a right for the group in the conception of cumulata is to extend, is an extension of the individual rights of the different persons. And in order to see this, we can make an example. If, for instance, there is a French-speaking person who has individual rights, for instance, like vote rights or protection of the law rights and so forth and so on. But if this person is not considered the right to grow up in the French culture, in the French language, then this person, this individual, will be damaged in the very individual right. Is in the very individual right to expand his personality. It is important to notice that Wilhelm always considers the right for the groups not independently of the significance that they have for the development of the individual. They are an extension of individual rights, and therefore he always speaks of a liberal theory and of a liberal interpretation of group rights. So I can perhaps make you some examples of the causes and principles and grounds because of which Wilhelm considers us as indispensable and as necessary the extension of traditional individual rights to new rights, group rights, which are nonetheless to be considered, to be regarded as an extension of the traditional individual rights, not as something completely different from the traditional individual rights. They are an extension which in a certain sense enables the traditional individual right to be completed. That is, they are a completion and a way of possibility of the traditional rights themselves. For instance, he points out following points in order to say that group rights are necessary. That is, for instance, I quote from one of his publications, traditional human rights standards are simply unable to resolve some of the most important and controversial questions related to cultural minorities. Which languages should be recognized in the parliament, bureaucracies, and courts? Should each ethnic or national group have publicly funded education in its mother tongue? Should internal boundaries, legislative districts, provinces, states, be drawn so that cultural minorities form a majority within a local region? Should governmental powers be devolved from the central level to more local or regional levels controlled by particular minorities, particularly on culturally sensitive issues of immigration, communication, and education? Should political offices be distributed in accordance with the principle of national or ethnic proportionality? Should the traditional homeland of indigenous peoples be reserved for their benefit and so protected from encroachment by settlers and resource developers? What are the responsibilities of minorities to integrate? What degree of cultural integration can be required of immigrants and refugees before they acquire citizenship? End of the quotation. I would only add that, of course, I have all these passages in my document, and I can, of course, deliver to all those who are interested in them in this subject and in these instruments, materials, the corresponding documents. But Anyway, in order to go forward with that discussion, you see it is a long, long list of points which clears why the traditional individual rights are not sufficient in order to understand and in order to solve the problem which a country could have when this country has different minorities in its own territory. That is, how can we solve the problems without taking into account group rights? For instance, as it is mentioned in the languages, what should we do with the recognition of languages for different groups? What should we do with the subvention for the different groups? And what should we do with the internal borders between regions and so on and so forth? That is, what can we do with the integration of minorities? That is, on which degrees of cultural integration are necessary for the immigrants? And what should we do with the devolution of powerful regions from the central authority to the different regions if there are different group components, linguistic components, cultural components between groups in the different regions? It is, we cannot pretend, suppose to solve all problems which we are confronted with in a multilinguistic state, for instance, if we do not take into consideration the possibility of giving some right to the different group rights, to the different populations, peoples who are present in the same country. And of course, it is fundamental, the Canadian experience. What can we do with the public funding of the school? What should do the central government in Ottawa as regards the public funds for schools in the English-speaking territory or in the French-speaking territory? Should the central government have a politics of assimilation to the English-speaking majority, or should, on the contrary, the central government respect the presence of the French-speaking minority, and give, of course, correspondingly public funds for school, for cultures, for theater in French, and so on and so forth? This is a problem which cannot be solved on the basis of the individual rights, of the rights for individuals. You should enter into a different dimension, which is not incompatible with the individual rights, but which is an extension of it. And if you want to secure the compresence, the coexistence of two different groups without a politics of assimilation, but on the contrary, practicing a politic of respect of the diversity of the cultures within the same country, you should enter a perspective of, for instance, public funding for French schools, of the minority schools, for schools of the minority language, or you should, for instance, devolve some powers from the central authority of the capital, in this case Ottawa, to the form of decentralization of power in the different components of the country itself. Of course, this is the case of Canada, but it can be applicable to every country which has different cultural and language components in itself. Of course, it is not only a problem for Canada. It can be, of course, exemplified very well on the basis of the Canada example, but it is not something which necessarily involves only Canada. And for instance, in order to quote something else from Kumlik, in order to give a better example of his way of reasoning, he says, for instance, also about the traditional human rights, he says, the problem is not that traditional human rights doctrine gives us the wrong answer to this question, that is, what to do when we have two or more groups in the same country. It is rather that the traditional human rights often give no answer at all. The right to free speech does not tell us what an appropriate language policy is. The right to vote does not ask how political boundaries should be drawn or how power should be distributed between levels of government. The right to mobility does not ask what an appropriate immigration and naturalization policy is. It is not that these individual rights, traditional individual rights, are not valid. Of course, they are valid, but the problem is they are not sufficient. We need something else if you want to guarantee a coexistence between different populations. And so I could only, so I think that, of course, only this quotation, because Kymlicka is aware of the dangers of group rights, of course. It is not that it undervalues the problem of group rights. For instance, he says in one of his works, recognizing minority rights has obvious dangers. The language of minority rights has been used and abused not only by the Nazis, but also by apologists for racial segregation and apartheid. It has also been used by intolerant and belligerent nationalists and fundamentalists throughout the world to justify the domination of people outside their group and the suppression of dissenters within the group. A liberal theory of minority rights, therefore, must explain how minority rights coexist with human rights and how minority rights are limited by principles of individual liberty, democracy, and social justice. This is only an example. I see that I have already abused of the time. I could only say something about and two other things with a short examples. I will be very, very short, of course. We can prosecute then this discussion in the next seminar. Another thinker who is very interested, in my opinion, who has concentrated herself on the question of minority rights within the legal system, is Dorian Coleman, who is professor in the United States, and she is, so to speak, rather critical about the problem of a sort of multiculturalism within the legal system. One of her most interesting studies has this title, not accidentally. The title is Individualizing Justice through Multiculturalism, the Liberal Challenge. And the sense of our article, which is very, very long and very, very complex, of course, at least for me, because I have not studied jurisprudence as first matter, is that if we take at least some points of multiculturalism and introduce it without observation of compatibility in the legal system, then we can run the risk of damaging, of compromising the equal protection of the laws and to make an offense to all the victims of the law. I would only like to quote the cases which she mentioned and the conclusion these cases had. For instance, she mentioned this case very shortly, very sympathetically, which happened over the last year. She said, in California, quotation, I quote, in California, a Japanese-American mother drowned her two young children in the ocean of Santa Monica and then attempted to kill herself. Rescuers saved her before she drowned. The children's recovered bodies bear deep bruises where they struggle as their mother held them under the water. The mother later explained that in Japan, where she is from, her actions would be understood as the time-honored customary practice of parent-child suicide. She spends only 1 year in jail, the year she's on trial. Another case, in New York, a Chinese-American woman is bludgeoned to death by her husband. Charged with murder, her husband explains that his conduct comports with a Chinese custom that allows husbands to dispel their shame in this way when their wives have been unfaithful. He is acquitted of murder charges. Third case, for instance, back in California, a young Laotian American woman is abducted from her place of work at Fresno State University and forced to have sexual intercourse against her will. Her Hmong immigrant assailant explains that among his tribe, such behavior not only is accepted, but expected. It is the customary way to choose a bride. Is sentenced to 120 days in jail, and his victim received $900 in reparations. And then the fourth one, a Somali immigrant. Well, I can only limit to this case because I think they are already interesting. That is, this is the problem of the cultural difference. That is, there are different cases in before the law and before the court, but they have a common point. That is, in all 3 cases, there was either homicide or something less grave. That homicide, anyway, very, very, very important as regards the delicate. And in all 3 cases, those who were guilty of the action said, well, it was my culture that brought me to do this. And since they presented the ground for their action as culture, they had the benefit of condemnation, which would be not the same if they have not adduced this ground of the culture. This is the problem. That is, the fourth Coleman speaks of individualizing justice through multiculturalism. The acknowledgement of determinate rights to determinate groups brings about a situation in the courts of the United States, but this can be the case also for other counts, in which the victims are not protected enough, and those who are guilty obtain some less great condemnation because they have at least partial justification that they had a different culture from that of the United States, and therefore they could not be completely guilty of what they were doing. But this she says, for shortly said, I quote from her thought, from her article, she says, in these cases, she mentioned, the defense presented and the prosecutor or court accepted cultural evidence as an excuse for the otherwise criminal conduct of immigrant defendants. These official decisions appear to reflect the notion that moral culpability of an immigrant defendant should be judged according to his or her own cultural standards, rather than those of the relevant jurisdiction. Although no state has formally recognized the use of exonerating cultural evidence, some commentators and judges have labeled this strategy as the cultural defense. It is the defense which is organized on the basis of the culture of a member in order to use these cultural influences to diminish the responsibility of the guilty person. Please.
Excuse me, dear Gianluigi, sorry that I interrupt you, but we just now have any time, only 5-10 minutes, okay, to say bye.
So, no, I only wanted to say that this, of course, there are very many things to be analyzed, But the point is this, I think Kublika is right, at least in the foundation. This, we cannot lose any problems of coexistence of different groups without group rights. But we have, on the other side, to meditate very, very long time on, for instance, the thought of Coleman, because you can concede group rights, but you have to pay attention to the consequences that this concession can have for the legal system, because the equal protection of the law should remain in spite of the group rights. This equal protection should be there everywhere, anywhere, and if you go against the equal protection of the law for the victims, then you damage the liberal system. This was the point. I thank you. I can conclude. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so I hope that everybody who have now some questions for dear Gianluigi, so will write to Dr. Segalebra. So this is his email, and we will discuss everything in the pages of different our journals. So we wait for your publication. Excuse me, but we have no time, so I will make my presentation next time. But a few words now I want to say, because it's the main topic of our discussion. So my presentation is sociological jurisprudence in the early 20th century on the legal psychology of judges, and I would like to conclude all your beautiful presentations in such words. The legislator, I suppose, cannot foresee all possible situations where the precepts may be applied. As a reasonable regulator of social relations, the judge must decide what meaning the law should acquire. The task of any lawyer, not only judges, entails by closer to people and implementing the principles of legality, justice, and the rule of law. So I would like to say like that formalism is a technical flaw that must be overcome. So we should every time think about life, and our excellent speakers today do so. So thank you very much. I am glad to see you, because for most of all, we were writing letters, but it's very beautiful that we have such a great responsibility to see each other and that communication. Thank you very much for all contributors, your attention and discussion. Thank you for coming.